Good evening to one and all, and thank you very much for being here today with us on this webinar that will be devoted to alternative proteins.
Parenthesis on English. For those of you who prefer to hear this presentation in English, please click on the language icon below. You can see below. So thank you. A Fundesplai
In Fundesplai, we work to raise awareness with regard to the key environmental and climate challenges that we face with regard to food. And at our headquarters in the Prat de Llobregat in the Barcelona province, we are developing several projects and activities and conferences and webinars, such as this one, focus on this relationship between our food system and the current climate emergency. And this webinar is part of the Climate Action to the Table project that is funded by the European Climate Initiative, and Fundesplai is one of its partners. And reducing the consumption of meat is key for a sustainable future. We know that the meat industry is one of the industries that contributes the most to climate change. For example, they represent 14.5% of the greenhouse gases, and this industry is also related to the pollution of rivers and other environmental problems, and the excessive consumption of meat. And this combined with a lack of exercise and other aspects can lead to conditions such as obesity, cardiovascular diseases, or cancer. So, reducing meat consumption is beneficial both for the planet and our health, and reducing meat consumption is possible. It's possible because the proteins that we need to live can be obtained from other types of food. And today, in this webinar, we are going to be talking about the most recent technological advances, and we will refer, for example, to plant-based diet, microalgae, or the use of fungi. And we'll also talk about edible insects as a high-quality protein source with a low environmental impact. And today we have with us Albert Ribas-Agustí, who's a researcher at the Functionality and Food Safety Program of the IRTA, the Research and Technology Institute of Agrifood. And we also have with us Marta Ros Baró from the Open University of Catalonia, who is also a member of the Food Lab group of that university. We are very happy to have both of you today with us in this session. And just one thing for the audience. If you have any questions or remarks for Marta or Albert, you can write them on the chat. You can see that there's a Q&A chat, and then after the two presentations, we will read the questions and remarks. And before giving the floor to the speakers, I am going to show you a video of one of the activities we've organized. An exhibition for healthy and sustainable food. Well, without further ado, Albert, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Barbara, and good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be at this webinar. Thank you for inviting me. And I'd like to share with you the current situation of research and of the industry with regard to alternative proteins, mainly plant-based proteins and microalgae and fermentation-based proteins. First of all, Barbara has already mentioned this, but the first question is, why are consumers now more interested in alternative proteins, and why is the industry also showing interest in these new alternative proteins? There are some ethical reasons, of course, but mainly when we look at the figures, we see the environmental impact of the protein production. Animal-based proteins have an impact because of the greenhouse gases emissions and because of the resource consumption, which is much higher than what is needed for the production of alternative proteins. Here we have this chart, and on the left, you see some bars with an arrow, and the one on the right shows the carbon dioxide emissions of proteins, plant-based proteins, and when compared to the emissions of chicken protein, we see that the emissions are double. In the case of pork, it's 3 times higher, and in the case of beef, it's 20 times higher. If we look now at the space use, the proportion is also very impacting. To make chicken protein, you need 3 times more space than to produce plant-based protein. In the case of pork, it's 5 times more, and in the case of beef, it's 5 times more. And now I would like to show the water consumption needed to produce 100 grams of protein. In the case of chicken protein and pork protein and beef protein, it's 12 times higher than that of plant-based protein. I just wanted to share with you these figures, and this is a key criterion considering the current situation of our environment. And now I will speak about the different alternative protein sources. Firstly, the plant-based proteins. We also have proteins coming from algae and microalgae and from fermentation processes, also from insects. Marta will tell us more about edible insects afterwards. And there's also the possibility of having cultivated meat, but I am going to focus on the first 3 categories. That's plant-based, then microalgae, and then fermentation processes based on bacteria, yeast, and fungi. We'll start with the plant-based protein. Pulses and cereal are rich protein sources. Soybean, for example, has a 14% of protein, and this means that soybeans are an interesting source of protein. But it's not just soybeans that are interesting. We also have pulses and other types of plants. We have some that, for example, adapt very well to dry areas. And this is important to consider because they have a high protein content. And to obtain this type of flour can be, as I say, paramount for the food industry. Additionally, we see here more plants and pulses that can be protein sources. We have soybean, as I mentioned before. This is always a benchmark product that is used to obtain protein ingredients. And we see some other emerging plant-based proteins and that have another advantage versus soybean or peas, because it's important to have different types of amino acid contents to have a more nutritional diet. And it's also important for agriculture so that we have different types of crops. We know how soybeans take up many of these crops worldwide, and it's important to diversify these crops. And we also have some upcoming plant-based sources such as duckweed and others.
Bé, com comentava,
pulses and cereal
són plantes, és un material ric
naturalment en proteïna. Have high protein content, and protein is important for our diet, but amino acids, essential amino acids, are also key for our health, and it's important to develop products with these ingredients and with the appropriate content of amino acids. And there's a wide range of essential amino acids that can be represented by different types of plants. It is a challenge, however, from a technological point of view, when we refer to the bioavailability of these amino acids, because versus animal protein, sometimes the comparison doesn't stand, because plant-based protein should contain the right amino acids, but these amino acids should also be appropriately bioavailable, and that is why we need to continue developing research to increase this bioavailability. Apart from using different types of plants to produce flour, another option is to obtain an isolated protein, an ingredient that has a high content of protein, 70 to 80%, and technologically, this is an advantage, because this means that we can target the protein to the end product And during the process,
aquella
the
capacitat emocionant, aquella propietat tecnològica que nosaltres necessitem
technological
per fer un producte en concret, doncs també podem aplicar
characteristics
processos
can be
anar
further
identificant.
developed, as I say, to adapt the
Per això,
protein to
l'altra cara de la
the
moneda és
end product.
el procés
And
per obtenir aquests aïllats
during the
també s'ha
process,
d'incloure,
however,
ja
to
que moltes
obtain
vegades es passa per uns
isolated
processos de
protein,
transformació que poden ser
we
molt invasius,
must
ultraprocessats,
be
podríem dir-li,
careful
el que
to
també és un repte per part de
overcome
la
the
recerca
challenge of
que hem
over-processed
de tenir en compte per
plant-based
obtenir, per
proteins.
tal de tenir
The goal is to have
productes
healthy
saludables.
proteins.
I
Here
aquí
we have
veiem uns
some
quants exemples
examples
de
of
productes
plant-based products
plant-based que podem
available
trobar
on
en el
the
mercat.
market,
En trobem des
from
d'anàlegs frescos,
fresh
el que
products,
seria l'equivalent
for
a
example,
croquetes,
hamburgers,
salsitxes, que ja tothom
sausages, or
coneixereu marques
steak.
que estan presents al
You're
mercat.
all
També
aware of some
ja
of
porten temps
these
presents
brands that have
en el mercat
been
les
available
lleis,
for a long
fruites,
time
llàcties,
on the
formatges,
market. We also
i
have
proteïnes alternatives. I també hi ha
alternative dairy
també hi ha
products,
disponibilitat
and the
d'anàlegs de
same
productes
happens with
embotits buits
cold
i
cuts and
productes curats,
cold
fins i tot
meats.
fuet,
For
xoriç, pernil,
example,
aquests productes que
ham.
també des del punt de vista
And
tecnològic
this
és un
is a
repte, ja
challenge
que tenen unes propietats
technologically
sensorials que són
because
bastant
the
difícils
taste is
d'imitar
very
respecte a un
difficult
producte animal.
to
I aquí a l'IRTA estem treballant en
emulate,
diferents
and we
projectes
are
per
working
tal
with
de
different
desenvolupar
products so
productes que
that we
tinguin
can
un
provide
aspecte satisfactori.
very similar characteristics.
Molt bé. I pel que fa al mercat,
As for
sense
the
detenir-me
market,
excessivament, és
we
creixement,
see
un mercat que està
that
a
the
l'alça, que està en
plant-based
creixement,
food
tot i que
sales are
productes amb
growing,
proteïna vegetal més tradicionals, com poden ser el tofu o el tempeh,
mainly tofu and
s'està començant a
tempeh.
veure que comença a decréixer.
However,
En
now
favor
we
d'altres
see
productes més
that there
innovadors
are
amb
other
unes
products that
propietats
are growing even
sensorials
more that
importants.
are new products. I will
Ara
now
passem a les microalgues com a font també de
speak
proteïna
about
alternativa.
microalgae as another alternative
Aquí
protein
aquesta llista que veieu
source. Here we have a list
d'espècies de
of
microalga.
microalgae
Veureu les que estan
species,
marcades en
and the
verd
ones
són les
in
que
green
la regulació
have
de la
been
Unió Europea,
approved
que és
by
molt
the
estricta
European
quant a ús
regulation,
de
and the
noves fonts de
European
proteïna,
regulation is
són les que
very
són
strict in
acceptades, ja que el
accepting
seu consum
new
estava
ingredients,
establert a la Unió
and
Europea abans de l'any
their consumption, in fact, was
1997, que és
approved
quan es
at
va
the EU before
establir la
1997.
regulació.
And
A partir
since then,
d'aquest any,
any
qualsevol fabricant que
manufacturer who
vulgui
wishes to
introduir proteïna
introduce
ha de passar per un procés bastant tediós
this type of
d'aprovació.
protein
Ha de
must
passar
go through a
unes
very
unes
strict process
s'ha d'assegurar, s'ha de presentar un
based on a
informe en el
report
qual
that
es
will
garanteix
guarantee
el
that
consum
the
d'aquella
consumption
proteïna
of that
és ben
protein
segur.
will
En
be
aquest cas,
safe.
la Unió Europea
And as
és
I
molt
said
garantista
before,
en quant
the European
a la
Union
salut dels consumidors.
always
I hi ha
focuses
algunes espècies
on
que estan marcades
the
en groc que estan
safety of
considerades novel
consumers.
food, és
And
a dir,
there's
aquestes proteïnes
some foods
aquesta espècie de
that
proteïna
are
que no
considered
s'havia consumit històricament,
novel
però s'ha
food,
comprovat i confirmat
and
que
they
són
have
segures
been
per al consum humà
considered
i que
safe
estan
by the
aprovades
EU.
actualment. Novament, aquí per
Here we
presentar-vos
can
uns
see
quants productes
some
que es
products
troben al mercat.
available
En el cas de
on
les
the
microalgues,
market. You can
veureu que estan
see
disponibles
that
com a
microalgae
suplement
are
dieètic.
available
Veureu
as
aquesta microalga
supplement.
dessecada per
It's the microalgae
com a
that has
complement
been
alimentari,
dried up,
però
but
també es
it's
pot trobar
also
com a ingredient per
used as
desenvolupar
an
nous productes,
ingredient.
com veureu aquí.
For
Hi ha,
example,
per
we
exemple,
have
batuts proteics ferits en
smoothies
proteïna,
with
en
microalgae
microalgues,
with a
des
high
de
protein
barretes
content.
de cereals,
There's also
pasta, també és
pasta
habitual
or
trobar-la,
cereal
uns
bars
bombons
or
que
even
ens fabrica
chocolates that,
per una empresa
in fact,
lleidatana,
the
que
ones we
són
see here on the
més baixos
screen are
en
produced
sucre.
by a factory, by a
A més,
company
una
in
de les
Catalonia, in Lleida.
propietats que són molt característiques
And
de les microalgues és aquest
microalgae
color
are
verd
characterized
fosc
by
tan
their
intens
deep green color.
que donen aquest color al producte final,
And
que en alguns casos doncs,
in
pot
some
ser
cases, is
atractiu, en
a
alguns
very
altres casos pot ser
appealing
no.
color,
Això s'ha
but not so
d'investigar.
appealing in other
Inclús,
cases.
en el
In the case of spirulina, if it's purified, it can turn blue. And it's a calorie that is used for food and that is beneficial for our health, and it can be found in chewing gum, for example. And at our research center at the IRTA, we are working in a project with microalgae, and we have developed some products based on chlorella, spirulina, tetrasalmis, and we've used different species with pigments so that the green color is not so obvious, and this allows us to develop different types of products such as bread or vegetable purees. And in this case, I can present this table. It's very small, but we did develop some vegetable purees with these microalgae. And the idea was to add the microalgae so that we would have a high protein content. And in this table, we can see the value of protein and the different contents and the different levels of addition for the vegetable purees. Now, I will refer to fermentation as a process to obtain alternative proteins. From a technological standpoint, we're talking about a process where a microorganism is introduced in a culture medium, then the microorganism grows, and then we can obtain a biomass with a high protein content. Here, the European legislation, once again, is very strict with regard to new protein sources, and few species are approved for human consumption, although companies and human research centers, I meant, are working hard to propose new protein sources that are accepted by the European regulation. In this case, fermentation takes place in a liquid medium, and we can grow yeast and bacteria and fungi. Here we have different species, for example, Saccharomyces used in beer, and also Fusarium. Here you can see the whole production process. First, we need to identify the substrates. This can be agricultural and food waste, it's important always to guarantee the safety of products. Then we choose the fermentation species based on lab tests. Then the strains are selected for industrial production. I wanted to give you here the example of Fusarium venenatum that has a high protein content. It's 50% almost, and it also has a high content of essential amino acids with a high bioavailability, very high, in fact. There are several products that are already available on the market that include fungi. And we have, for example, corn. This is a British company. Here we have the fermenting system based on injected air to promote air exchange and the growth of the fungi. The biomass is collected, then the protein is collected, and based on this biomass, they produce different products that have a different taste, for example, a chicken flavor. This company's patent expired in 2010, and this meant that other companies could use this process. For example, we have Abunda, that is an ingredient based also on this microorganism. Nevertheless, corn does state that they have the know-how and the scalability. There's another example I'd like to share with you. Solein, based on bacteria. This ingredient has a very efficient growth based on carbon dioxide and hydrogen from water hydrolysis, and it's very sustainable. And according to this company, Solein will liberate global protein production. Its use has been approved in Singapore, not yet in Europe. We think it'll be approved soon in the US. The EU, though, is much stricter always in every process. So we hope, in any case, that it'll be approved in the near future. I'm afraid that I'm running short for time, so I'll try and go more quickly. Now I'd like to refer to fermentation in solid medium instead of having a liquid medium for fermentation. We use a solid medium based on a plant or vegetable ingredient with very promising properties. Here we have some examples, for example, tempeh. And here we also have Kinoko. This is an Israeli company that is pending the EU approval. Another company is Libre Foods that produces this type of bacon based on this ingredient. And now, to end, I'd like to mention the advantages of fermentation products. Firstly, we have a very quick duplication. We're talking from 10 to 120 minutes, and that is based on bacteria and yeast, but it's always a challenge
a l'hora també
to
de traslladar això
apply the ingredient to the different products. We have to check the presence of nucleic acids, also the biomass contamination, the legislation, and the scalability, which can be quite difficult because sometimes the scale does work at a lab level, but not an industrial level. And then we also need a good control of mycotoxins. And the prospects for alternative proteins are good. We have an exponential growth, particularly in second and third generation products that go beyond pulses and cereal. So these would be the key messages. Firstly, the huge potential of new protein sources, and we are referring here to yeast, bacteria, microalgae, pulses, and seeds. We need to be very eco-efficient in our production methods. We have to find the best way of having a good scalability with an affordable price and with a low environmental impact. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Albert, for your presentation. We see the amazing potential of these new products and solutions. Now we will give the floor to Marta, who will tell us about edible insects. The floor is yours. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this seminar where I'll be focusing on the trends of edible insects based on the ODS and the challenge of reducing meat consumption. And thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing our research. And I am going to explain the results of my PhD project. First of all, I'd like to say that the food system is one of the main drivers of climate change, and therefore we need to find more environmentally friendly food systems to feed the growing population. According to the World Bank, the world population will grow up to 9 billion by 2050. This means that we need to produce about 50% more food in order to feed an extra 2 billion people. And according to the FAO, the entomophagy, that is insect consumption, could be a solution to the food shortage that is expected to occur with the growing population. We're going to have a look at the role of insects.
Vale, perfecte. Els
insects represent 80% of the animals in the world, and they are considered as high protein sources. However, we have only bred a few species for their consumption. the breeding of insects for human consumption appears to have several environmental benefits, such as reducing pollution, because it reduces the greenhouse gases emissions, and there is a better efficiency of food conversion. And
llavors, tot això ens
all
ve
these
amb una base, no? Doncs que en el gener del
advantages
2018, a veure que passo la següent diapositiva,
are
el gener del 2018 es va publicar la normativa
included
europea
in
sobre els
the
novel foods on s'incloïen
novel
els
foods
insectes, tant
regulation
sencer,
that
en
was
parts com ingredients
passed
de
in
farines, extractes,
2015.
etc.
We
La llista
have
europea d'insectes comestibles
different
incloïa,
edible
doncs,
insects that
Domesticus,
are
Tenebria monitor,
included
Locusta
in
migratoria, Grillo
the
dificita, Latus,
EU list,
Xistoria
such as the
gregaria,
house
Alphitogus
cricket, the
dilaperius i Aphilis
silkworm, the
mellifera.
yellow
El fet que
or
aquesta llista doncs, no
mealworms,
incloés
and
tots els
the
insectes
black
va generar
soldier
certa
fly.
una
And
incertesa considerable. No?
this
I s'ha
regulation,
demanat una
however,
revisió
doesn't
de la
include
normativa
all
de
the
seguretat alimentària.
possible
A moltes societats,
edible
el consum
insects. We
d'insectes és un
know
tabú
how
alimentari i hi ha
edible
molts obstacles,
insects and
sobretot
insect
socials i
consumption
culturals,
can be
per
a
la seva
food
acceptació.
taboo in
En el 2021
many
es van publicar les 4
countries,
opcions
and
favorables de
in
l'autoritat de l'EFSA sobre el consum
2021
d'insectes, que serien les
there was
espècies
a
que
list
actualment coneixem com
published
Tenebrio monitor, Locusta
of
migratoria,
those
Acheta domesticus
insects
i
that
Apidophios
are
diaperinus. Aquesta última
considered
doncs, és la més
edible
innovadora perquè ha
insects,
estat
and this
autoritzada des de fa
last one
molt
was
poquet temps.
authorized very
I aquí, per
recently.
exemple, podeu
Here
veure com la
we
llei
see
formula no,
the
una mica
law
les
that
quantitats i
establishes
la
the
inclusió
quantities
de
and the
les proporcions segons
proportions of
els
edible
aliments que nosaltres
insects
vulguem
in
formular en un
food
futur per
for
al
human
consum humà.
consumption. And
Us
this
explico una
is
mica la meva
my
recerca, no? Amb
research
l'equip d'investigació del
working
Food
at
Lab de la
the
UOP i com a
Catalonia
corresponsables de la
Open
publicació en Agrifood
University,
i
and
Patricia Casas,
at
les dues
the
doctores,
Food
hem
Lab, we
publicat un
have
sistemàtic
published
review
a
sobre els
systematic
insectes
review of
comestibles
edible
pels humans i
insect
la salut
consumption for
planetària.
human and
Aquesta
planetary health.
revisió
The
sistemàtica
goal
el que pretenia
was
era examinar
to
els resultats
examine the
per la
health
salut i l'impacte
outcomes and
ambiental pel
environmental
consum
impact of
d'insectes
edible insect
comestibles.
consumption.
Es van
We
seguir
followed
totes les
the
directrius de PRISMA
guidelines,
i 25
and
articles
25
van ser
articles
per
met the
complir els
inclusion
criteris
criteria.
d'inclusió.
12
12
animal and
en
6 human
estudis d'animals,
studies,
6 en humans
and
i 7
7 studies on
estudis sobre resultats de
sustainability
sostenibilitat.
outcomes.
A la
And
discussió, nosaltres
we
el que vam fer va ser
divided
dividir els
the
resultats
results
en 3 parts
into
basades a les
3
3 dimensions de
categories based
sostenibilitat
on
alimentària
the
que va
3
definir primer CAL,
dimensions
amb l'àmbit de
of
salut,
uh,
socioeconòmic i
food,
mediambiental. I es van
and
poder incloure i respondre
we
tots els
looked
objectius de
at
desenvolupament
the
sostenible tenint en
objectives
compte la
of
globalitat
the
dels insectes
SDGs. Now
comestibles.
I will
Ara us
explain
explicaré els
the outcomes.
resultats que vam obtenir.
Firstly, we'll
Anem a
start with
començar
the
amb l'àmbit
health
de la salut.
dimension. And
Abans de parlar
before
directament
showing
dels resultats de
the
l'àmbit de la salut, us volia
outcomes,
descriure
let
algunes
me
característiques generals
explain
dels insectes.
some of
Els insectes
the
comestibles contenen quantitats
characteristics of
relativament
edible
altes de
insects
nutrients
that
que
have
són
a
essencials per la dieta
very
humana. S'estima que depenent de
important
l'espècie,
nutritional
aproximadament
value, and
entre el 70%
depending
i
on
el
the species,
98% dels
it is
insectes són
considered
digeribles.
that
S'han
almost
trobat alguns insectes comestibles, com
80%
ara el grill
of
domèstic,
insects
són
are edible. Some
significativament
of
més
them,
nutritius que d'altres.
such
Aliments
as
tradicionals
the
com l'abella i
grasshopper,
el
can
pollastre, en
be
funció, per
more
exemple, dels hidrats de
nutritional
carboni,
than beef
energia,
if we
greixos
look
saturats,
at
sodi, i que
different aspects
proporcionen
such as
tots
protein, fat,
aquest
saturated
conjunt de
fat, fatty
nutrients.
acids, and
Molts
fiber.
d'aquests insectes
And
comestibles
as
són rics
I
en
mentioned
proteïnes i
before,
s'estima que contenen
edible
aproximadament entre un
insects
7 o un
have a
40%
high
de proteïnes en
protein
P7 depenent de
content.
l'espècie. L'aminograma també és molt complet
And
i
it's
això
very
és molt interessant,
interesting
per exemple, per
also
cobrir les
to
necessitats
look
proteïques i
at
sobretot
the
en temes,
amino
per exemple, en temes
acids,
de
for
millora
example,
muscular, no? Com
for
podria ser el cas de
muscle
desnutrició,
improvement, where there is
suplementació, és a
a
dir, per exemple, enriquir
malnutrition,
dietes
and there
basades
is
en
a
proteïnes provinents de
requirement
cereals que poden ser
for
pobres en lisina,
specific
en teobromina, triptòfan, no? I també per
dietary
tal de que
requirements.
amb
So
aquesta
it's
proporció, no, que ens
important
complementen
to
els insectes, doncs,
look
puguin arribar a ser
at
més
what
complets.
edible
La majoria
insect
dels insectes
ingredients
comestibles
can
tendeixen a ser
provide.
rics en greixos
And
insaturats,
we see
especialment en àcids
that
grassos
edible
poliinsaturats, el que es
insects
coneix en el nom de
have
PUFA.
high
A
omega-3
més, el seu
fatty
contingut en proteïnes i
acids,
greixos insaturats,
and
els insectes comestibles doncs, són
they
rics, per
also
exemple,
have
en vitamines del grup
B12
B12, en
vitamins
minerals,
and
especialment, doncs, per exemple, en
a
ferro,
high
zinc,
mineral
etc.
content.
Com a conclusions
Therefore,
d'aquest
we can
apartat,
say
podem
that
dir que els insectes
edible
comestibles
insects can change products so that they become high protein content products. And we're talking about alternative and sustainable proteins to include essential fatty acids without depending so much on fishery, where we see that there is an excess of use of the products that we obtain from the sea. And now, let's look at the values of proteins in animals. For example, with a supplement of 0.5 grams per kilo of glycosaminoglycans, we see a significant reduction of abdominal and empty-dimensional fat. And if it's a supplement of 5 milligrams of chitin or chitosan, we see a reduction of body weight and abdominal fat versus the control diets. And in these animal studies, we see that doses of up to 7 to 15% of edible insect inclusion level. We have reduced levels of triglycerides or blood glucose, and we see an increased microbiota diversity versus the control diet. Here we see the significant outcomes. And these are the studies in animals, but in humans, we see that doses of up to 7% of edible insect significantly improve gut health and reduce systemic inflammation. That means that they include bioactive peptides that are characterized by their anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory properties versus the control diets. And we also see a significant increase in blood concentrations of essential and branched-chain amino acids and a slowing of digestion versus the control diet. Here we see some of these results. Now, with regard to the environmental dimension, after this systematic review, we see the use of soil, the greenhouse gases emissions, energy use, and so on and so forth are better than that with cattle. And we also have insects that are fed with waste, food waste. So this food waste is not part of the value chain. However, the insects have a better environmental performance with this food waste. And in edible insect farms, we use a mixed diet. And when we use these different types of food sources instead of food waste, then the use of soil is higher and the use of energy as well. However, even so, we are working on improving these processes so that in the future we can reduce these quantities. And waste produced by insect farms is very low versus the cattle farm. And the insect farms therefore reduce the use of pesticides, of water, and of greenhouse emissions. We should also differentiate insect farms that are used for feed or food. As we said before, they can be fed with food waste, and food waste is more economical to transport. And in the area of energy, we have to see how we can use insect farms with better energy systems, with renewable energies. And edible insect farms show that it's possible to replace with insect flour the fish flour that is very often used for feed. Now, with regard to the social and economic dimension, we see the promotion of an inclusive economic growth. Edible insects are an affordable and accessible protein that help with circular economy, and it allows to increase the value of some products that are currently useless. They're very versatile and they allow for new products, new types of margarines, butter, bread, hamburgers, and it's important to focus on its acceptability, creating positive experiences. In developed countries, edible insects are not very well accepted. They are usually considered as products that belong to the rural world, and as I say, they are not easily accepted. So it's important to look for special characteristics to make them more acceptable. For example, we can use, for example, insect-based foods such as flowers instead of using the insect per se to make it more acceptable by consumers. And insects could be included in the future in the sustainable food pyramid at the same level as pulses. There are several scientific papers where edible insects are used as ingredients for food and not just for feed. For example, we can use them to produce hamburgers, butter, margarine, where there is a lower content of certain acids and fats, and we see that the high protein content is very advantageous. Just recently, we published this paper on consumers' acceptability and perception of edible insects as an emerging protein source. I've mentioned before how it's difficult to accept edible insects, and we did a survey and we looked at neophobia, social habits, and only 13.15% of participants in this survey had tried insects. And this led to discuss lack of custom and food safety as the main reasons for avoiding insect consumption. Therefore, edible insects need to have a more appetizing appearance, and flowers are the more accepted format. And the 40 to 59-year-old age group was the one most willing to consume edible insects. And it's important to introduce edible insects as food in the future and to inform people about their health, environmental, and economic benefits. Because if this information is shared with consumers, then the response is much more positive in terms of including edible insects in their diet. Here we have the distribution of food introduction context and level of reception by population group. We see in the first chart the context or circumstances of introduction of new foods into the diet, and then the second chart is the population group and willingness to welcome insect consumption. And for example, it's usually on holidays that consumers try edible insects for the first time, but that's not the best way. It's important to find other experiences that are closer to the local gastronomy, and it is adults who are more open to try edible insects more than young people. So what is key to introduce edible insects in our Western diet? Well, the idea would be to use the flower of these edible insects to create positive experiences that are close to our local gastronomy and to include it in the same percentages in food as other proteins. At the Basque Culinary Center, they have started using edible insects in many of their products. Here we have an international platform of insects for food and feed with a list of the brands available on the market. As for the future, based on what Albert said, we're going to have new products, including new ingredients, such as edible insects, and we would be in category 2, that's processed food, because we would be using the flower of edible insects that would be much more accepted in our Western culture to manufacture pasta or other products. And here we have this quote by Joshua Evans of the Nordic Food Lab, and he says that entomophagy is about more than merely putting a precise amount of protein on a plate. It's about making sure everyone on the planet has access to food that is affordable, healthy, diverse, environmentally sound, and yes, delicious. But it has to be recognized that it's not the insects themselves that are going to make this sustainable. It's humans who need to do this change. And I will end here. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. Wonderful, Marta. Thank you very much, and congratulations for your recently published paper.
Sí que és veritat que ens
It
sorprèn
is
molt, no?,
surprising to see these outcomes because
dels resultats que pensava que
one
potser la gent
thinks
jove
that maybe
estaria molt
young
més
people will
oberta,
be
no?,
more
a provar
open to
i veure de manera
trying
positiva
these
aquest
new
consum
products,
de
such as
justament la
edible
gent de
insects.
40
However,
50
it's
9
the
anys, no?,
age group of 40 to 59
Anem a
year olds
tenim
that
uns
are more
minutets,
open to its
anem a
consumption.
veure
Now
què
we're
tenim
going to check the Q&A chat to see if there are any questions or remarks.
Entenc que aquest és per
I think that's a question for Albert.
és viable
Is it
fer
feasible
fermentació a
to
casa
do
per aconseguir
fermentation at
aquestes
home to
proteïnes
have
dels
the
llevats i fongs que
proteins
has
of the
presentat?
yeast and fungi you mentioned?
Podria
Yes, you
ser,
can
però
do
no
it at home,
seria
but I don't
recomanable.
recommend it
Em
because
refereixo als exemples que he posat, estan enfocats també per
we
obtenir
need to
una biomassa
obtain a
com a
specific
ingredient que
biomass
després
as an ingredient
l'empresa
that
o
is
qui
then
la
used
manipula
by the manufacturing
incorpora d'una forma
plant to
que després
produce
unes propietats
specific
sensorials
products with
adequades que es modifiquin
specific characteristics, flavor,
I per l'altra
smell,
banda,
and so on.
també s'ha de vigilar
Additionally,
molt quan estem parlant
when
de fermentació amb
working
fongs,
with fungi,
s'ha de tenir molta cura amb
we
la possible
have to
producció
be
de toxines.
very careful
I això les
with
empreses,
the
per
production of
exemple,
toxins. For
per
instance,
exemple,
the
que he esmentat abans,
company Corn
ells
that I
van
mentioned
utilitzar
before
una
have a
soca
strain,
que és
use a
manipulable a la producció
strain
de toxines. Ells estan obligats a anar fent per
where they
cada
have to,
una
they
analítica
use a very specific strain, and even so, they have to do tests
impossible. Per tant,
at
una fermentació a casa
after every certain batches. This is something we cannot control at home. All right, here we're talking about food safety. Thank you, Albert, for your reply. And we also have another question for Marta. It says, I'm surprised that adults are more open to to edible insects. However, it seems that we still have a long way to go for insects, edible insects, to be accepted in our diet in the future. Of course, yes, because in the survey, when we looked at the population that was more open to introduce edible insects in the diet. All right. So, in this survey, we do see that, as I was saying, adults would embrace better edible insects in their diet. I suppose that this is also because of their awareness of the situation of the planet. And we have to remember that we eat sea insects. We do eat sea insects. However, there's a cultural barrier with edible insects, and we have to find new types of products then, because which products do you think will be available soon? You mentioned edible insect flour as an ingredient. Well, in Scandinavian countries, they're using edible insect flour for bread and pasta and biscuits. I hope they don't sell here the whole insects in our supermarkets, because that's not so appealing. Because that's where we see that there's a phobia. So we need to think about this sustainable alternative and use it appropriately instead of creating just bags of insects that can have a marketing purpose. All right, so it's just a marketing purpose, as you mentioned. And we also have to look at the percentage of ingredients in the products, because this is high quality protein. We need to include these ingredients at a higher percentage in the new product formulations, so that most of the protein comes from insect flour instead of from other proteins. And of course, we always have to abide by the law, of course. Here we have a remark by Valeria Silva. She is studying agro-food at university, and she's going to start her fourth university, and she's very grateful for this presentation. She found it very interesting. We also have Ms. Moreno, who has a question. What do we need to do to make these products seem like meat? Do we need to use ingredients that are not that natural? That's one question. And there's another remark. Yes, it's the following. Can you share with us initiatives that make these proteins more available in urban areas such as the city of Barcelona? So if you could just reply to these two questions, because we're out of time. Marta and Albert, can you read the questions on the chat? Yes, it's true. We need to find formulations that make products more appealing. And we also have to focus on the benefits of insects, because they have their own texture and flavor, and we have to find the right products for them because their flavor can be similar to that of nuts, although a bit more bitter. So we have to be careful with that bitterness. So the idea is to explore these new formulations and to have more affordable and more available products. It's important for new startups to develop new products. I already know many local startups in Catalonia that we hope in the future will be able to access the market so that the price of these products is lower and they become more affordable and they can be accessible to everyone. And Albert, at your research center, you are working on this as well. Yes, and I agree with everything that Marta has said, because for consumers to access these products, we need to make affordable products. It's an emerging market. The cost is still high. The production costs are still high versus traditional products. However, the goal is to have new processes within the food system that will help make these products more affordable with new production processes. And it's important to work with local products because very often now we need to use raw materials from other continents. So little by little, we will be able to reduce the production costs and to have more affordable products. I hope so, because it's very clear how beneficial these alternative proteins are versus meat. We are talking about many different types of benefits, health benefits, economic benefits, and also it's beneficial for the planet. So thank you very much for your presentations, and I'd like to thank our audience as well. You will be receiving this webinar by email so that you can see it again and share it with more people. I know that many of you are interested in having the presentations, and I confirm that we can share them with you. And well, thank you very much for everything and enjoy your evening. Thank you. Goodbye.